Instilling Peace at the Workplace, Lessons from Israeli and Palestinian Youth. And so this study takes a look at Kids4Peace, which is a nonpartisan, non-sectarian, nonprofit organization that facilitates contact and dialogue between the Israeli and Palestinian youth and their families. And their mission is is a commitment to rejecting violence, challenging an unjust and unsustainable status quo, and working together for long-term solutions. And so the questions I asked here were, what is the interaction between collective identity and experience in Kids4Peace? In what ways do young people benefit or fail to benefit from Kids4Peace? And then how do the larger power structures and power asymmetries impact youth perceptions of their experience in Kids4Peace? And so the author recruited a sample of 19 participants and from Kids4Peace, and she interviewed them, coded those interviews, found common themes, and examined those themes against the backdrop of the organization and the conflict. The interview questions revolved around the themes of, they had an introduction, programming, personal transformation, negative externalities, positive supports, hope and perceptions, and then action, social change, and ripple effect, and then finally knowledge and perceptions and agency. And so the results of this were that the youth that she interviewed almost unilaterally agreed that their experience with Kids4Peace allowed them to undergo a process of finding their personal voices through a combination of solidifying the self and being given the opportunities to express this self through opinions and personal narrative. And the results were positive for Israeli Jews as well as Muslim and Christian Palestinians. The criticism of this camp was the organization was rooted in the lack of attention to the problematic structures and power asymmetry, because this dynamic can create this cycle of continuing power disparities and maintenance of the status quo. And this kind of reminds me of, within mediation, the importance of recognizing those power disparities as kind of a neutral party, kind of has some sort of relationship there, I think. But they found that despite the merit of these arguments, it's apparent that in this research that when coming face to face with the other in a deep and continuous way, issues of power asymmetry and collective blind spots become more difficult to ignore for some. So keeping that power asymmetry, I think, in mind is very important. And that's actually one of Anna Priya's key takeaways here on the bottom, that the author suggested, obviously power asymmetry must be checked carefully in order for such camps to be successful. And so facilitators of the camps or retreat must therefore be adequately trained to ensure that the space is designed equitably and existing workplace hierarchies are tactically broken rather than reinforced. And then she also kind of pointed at this key takeaway of the value of corporate retreats and how they're a common occurrence nowadays, but they can include some potential invigorating peace exercises. Intergroup contact and positive intergroup contact in this way can help enrich the workplace culture and create more inclusivity. So I think this is an interesting one. We've had some studies before on kind of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and I think this shows the value and the danger of some of these organizations that do their best to bring people together on very polarized sides.
Yeah, the first thing that stood out to me is just the need for individuals, as those especially parties in conflict, the importance of like telling their story, right? Because that's what it is. It's all their own narrative, their own story of what's happening. And the first bullet point under results, like acknowledging that, unilaterally agreed that it was helpful because they could express themselves through their own personal narratives. And I mean, that also kind of aligns with like mediation, right? And services like ours, more restorative practices within the workplace that give everyone a chance to tell their story, tell their narrative of what's happening. I think that's very important and building peace.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's a great, outcome for the people who were involved in this. But I do think that is a great point of the, I guess, like equality, but equity, right? Like ensuring everyone's needs are met. Since it sounds like there are different things that kind of, it sounds like maybe hindered some from feeling, fully like their voice was heard or something along those lines because of the existing dynamics. So lots to consider with it, though. I mean, I like that that she took it though and took it into, how corporate retreats can, be engaging and, maybe do things in a positive way that will help those interactions.
Yeah, and especially incorporating, she writes, invigorating peace exercises, just something that has to do with building team cohesion, group cohesion, right? Team building activities, I think is so very vital, and corporate retreats, any type of organization.
Yeah.
Well, conflict management games.
Conflict management games, yes. Yeah, incorporate those in your retreats.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because I had this professor who runs a Israeli-Palestinian reconciliation nonprofit, and what they do is, like, to start out the experience is they're adults, not kids, but they have to go into the desert, and they essentially they're working together to survive for a few days in the desert, camping out there, trying to make it through because it's a neutral space. The desert requires you to work together in order to survive and in order to make it out. And so that's kind of how they start it, because it requires team building. It requires that. And sometimes the conflict is talked about during that time, but a lot of times it's just relationship building.
Yeah.
And sharing stories.
Contact theory, right? At its finest.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I mean, I've spoken to this before. My grad school, it's a program of world learning, and world learning has youth programs all over, but they're largely based in at the campus in Brattleboro, Vermont. And they do, the Palestinian and Israeli youth is one big part of it, but there's other countries as well that kind of have conflict. I think there's like a US Mexico program, but it's all about team building and bringing youth from these kind of conflict zones, so to say, into a week-long summer camp, but strictly designed to kind of have these invigorating peace exercises and conflict management games.
That's really cool.
It is. Huh.
We just need to bring that to the workplace now.
Yes.
It's not just for kids. Kids are not the only one for peace, right?
I agree.